Hey, Dr. Shahan, and anyone who might see this. This is my notes that I took over the formative assessment. I'm not going to go over all of them because I want to save some of them. And I already made a full video that didn't have the recording of me in it. So I'm just going to go over the key points that I took from it. So some forms of formative assessment that I took was walking around checking the students. You did that a lot today in class. You made sure that everybody understood what they were doing, everybody stayed on task, and that everybody just understood what needed to be done and how timely it needed to be. And then you also asked if we were all ready to move on with a thumbs up, thumbs to the middle, and thumbs down to understand who was ready and who wasn't and what we needed to do. And you also said that, or the video we watched also said that checklists were a really good thing to do with students, and that with the checklist it'll show the student that or it'll have them learn responsibility, obviously, because they have to go through and check all the stuff. But it'll also, with the checklist, you have to make sure that they can't just check it out, because sometimes students will be like, check, 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 I'm done with this, I can go color now, I can go do whatever I want to, just because they don't want to go through the checklist. So if you have it where they can fill it out, then they won't be able to just check through it. And another thing that the video focused on was the standards, and standards are the focus for everything done within a classroom, and a standard embedded curriculum is completely different than standards embedded in a classroom. A standard embedded classroom is one that the standards are only posted in one area of the room and never thought twice about. So if I'm a teacher or when I become a teacher, not if I am a teacher, and I just post it in one side of my classroom and never think twice about it, my students aren't going to look over and be like, oh look, that's what we're doing in math today, that's the standard that we have in math today, we're going to learn about fractions or decimals. Or if I do it for science, my students aren't going to be like, oh yay, we're going to be science, they're not going to understand the words in the first part because they're younger children, but they're also not going to want to look and read that. And it's not enough just to post them in your classroom. There's no way you can just post them in your classroom and understand for your students to understand it. And it's a good tool for teachers to go over standards for the day within the classroom. It's a really good idea to do that with your kids. And it has to be embedded within all the work that the students are given, because if you just give them a coloring sheet about a hamburger when you're learning about cells in science, then how does that relate to each other? It doesn't. It has no relation at all whatsoever. And so by having the unit topic and essential question posted in the classroom, students do better with work and their understanding of the lesson. So if I tell my students we're going to learn about animals today, and they'll be like, oh, okay, cool. But if I just open up your textbook to this page, we're going to do this and yada, 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 and not go over the standard with them, they're not going to be as wanting to learn. And standards prepare students for in-state testing, because in-state testing is based off of the standards and how you teach them. You relay it to your students. So standards weren't originally in order, but they reorganized them, which I think is really cool. When all work has the standards involved, then that is what the standard-based school and curriculum is. And I wrote that really, really weird, and I don't understand why I wrote it that way. But another thing that I took from the video was repacking standards, and it was done for teachers and made the standards simpler for teachers and students to understand. And one of the really main points in the video was assessment drives instruction. How do you know that your students learned what the work that you gave them? How do you know that they understood it? How do you know how they did it? Did they understand it? You have to have an assessment so it'll drive your instruction. And educators and the state standards writers made the standards more logical and made them understandable terms with post-it notes, which I thought was really cool, that they could take a standard and just break it down into 4 or 5 different post-it notes for each standard. And backwards design was also talked about on the video. Standardized tests are obviously something that a child has to go through high school on, or elementary school on, not high school. I think that one of the points that was made was the post-test over units taught after they're taught, not at the end of the year. And I think that's a really good point, because if you are doing a post-test and you wait until the end of the year and just do one huge post-test, students are going to be more likely to miss the majority of the questions on the post-test, because maybe they didn't understand this lesson and you didn't ask them if they understood it or didn't understand it, so they don't know how to do it. And then another thing that's really good to do in your classroom is go back over stuff that your students haven't grasped completely right after, because if you don't go over it, then your students aren't going to understand it. And I think that you waste more time if you don't go over it, because if your students don't understand it, then you're just going on to an upper level part of it. Like with math, all of it's connected. And if you are going over denominators, well, then you want to add the denominators together. It's harder for the child to add the denominators together than if they would have understood the denominator better first. And standards have been added to make content more understandable, and I think that's a really key point. Like, I think the standards are a really good thing that everybody has to follow, because, I mean, you have to have standards within a classroom, because if you don't, then how are your students going to understand what to do in the class? So this is the end of my of my screencast-o-matic, and I know it's longer than what you wanted it to be, but I wanted to go over the notes and make sure that I just knew how to understand this. So I'm done now.